So, Ethan, thank you so much on behalf of SETSI for taking the time today, on your busy schedule for being a part of our community of practice page here on YouTube. So, on behalf of SETSI, we thank you again for today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Ethan Clark. I am a Coast Salish, n'xｗსԼ, and Chewhaytsum Douglas Treaty descendant. So, born and raised within my own Coast Salish territory, being, of course, in Vancouver and around Vancouver Island. So, what that means for myself, being a Chewhaytsum and a Douglas Treaty descendant, it's a very interesting relationship to have to Canada, to have to the Crown, of course, because my great grandfather signed a deal with Governor Douglas of the time with the Crown. And so that's really been the relationship, and I've been raised knowing that. Of course, my father being being Coast Salish and being a leader himself. And so always looked at myself as a Coast Salish person, and very grateful to have grown up on my land. And I found myself in off-reserve, non-status, and urban Indigenous politics. Right from the beginning. Of course, my father was in that space, is currently still in that space, and my mother, of course, working within the downtown east side with women and children in the area. And so, really getting insights into those, these different sorts of environments, different rights of people. Had a huge impact early on for myself. And so throughout sort of my career, finding my way into always being very entrepreneurial, but not being able to quite find the outlet. And of course, just through trial and error, starting multiple different ventures. Early on, it was consulting, of course, within the various NGOs that I worked with in the off-reserve, non-status political area. Of course, at the time, having no idea what any of this meant to start a company, or, I didn't even know anybody around me who ever really started a sort of company, at least not within the Indigenous community, not within that space. And so, very early on, myself and my sort of colleagues that were all on this journey, really seen a lack of connection between our people, and didn't really see a space of supporting each other and being able to leverage each other's networks or leverage each other's resources. And so throughout my various sort of ventures, both those that have been sort of successful and those that have failed miserably, that's always really been the focus. And it's ultimately, as I go through these ventures, it's been really just finding the things that I really value. And of course, my current venture is being Turtle Island Connection, really reestablishing those governance structures within Indigenous communities, away from the band council system, away from the Indian Act system, away from sort of Canada's structure, and really reestablishing those traditional structures that our peoples have governed ourselves for thousands of years. And then taking that sort of a step further and really discovering all types of technology, emerging technology that we could use as Indigenous peoples, that replicates our traditions, that replicates our protocols, our methodologies, and is able to uphold them. And so that's kind of where my journey into NationsFirst began. Of course, very focused on the finance sector and the governance sector, sort of given my background in the NGO space, where those two specific issues cause a lot of barriers.
Yes, wow, that's so amazing. Like, really to take a step back and be like, hold on, who were we before the invasion? How can we get back to that structure and
Mhm.
then implement, yes, technology, AI, those things that will help to free and liberate, your people. And that is so so important and so honorable. And I think, it's something that the next generation, because, I said, especially coming from a Caribbean, African cultures, the next generation is looking at us. What are you
Mhm.
guys doing? What you did, okay, now what are you doing? What seeds are you planting now? So that's amazing. Congrats to you on
Thank you.
that. So I
Thank
think
you.
I'm gonna get into what inspires you, because I really want to hear what, I mean, I can feel it and I hear it, but give me in your own words, like your personal mission and what inspires you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one big leading part of sort of growing up, one of my very core memories was, my family back in 1948 was removed from our territory, our home territory, the Chewhaytsum village. And so my grandmother, as a child, and her parents were forcibly removed by the Department of Defense. And so we spent a lot of time off reserve, um, and that was, of course, quite, that was kind of in the midst of the '60s scoop where my parents were growing up. That's, of course, when the Indian Act started weighing very heavy on us, and so kind of being raised around that, but then sort of returning home as a kid. Actually, at the time, I must have been about 8, 10 years old, with my father, going into the big house, and being so sort of disconnected throughout those kind of first years, not really knowing what my identity meant as an Indigenous person, but then going into the big house, sort of becoming a dancer, being able to sing, or see our folks singing, and how the actual protocol works in the big house, and it's beyond it. Kind of, I seen how it was beyond just like art and song and dance, and how it was really lawmaking, it was governance, there was a hierarchy to it. You could see all the different corners where the different people sat, depending on their lineage. And so seeing those complexities and how, those are still alive and well. Um, but of course, they're not, it kind of stays there, and it doesn't really move its way out of the big house. And of course, many don't have that sort of privilege that I had within our own people. But seeing that, and then seeing how we can scale those sort of systems, and create a real impact, not only for Indigenous peoples, but the broader, all the other people. There's 480 million Indigenous people, the same challenges, the same rights, the same issues that we're facing. Um, and I think that, really understanding our relationship to the Crown, to Canada, and to the world, and as well as just to our environment, and how we can use our rights, and our sort of methodologies to create a really strong impact. And so when I look at what really drives me, um, a huge part of it is really leveraging these things to, uh, for example, rather than having to extract a bunch of gold and copper and other resources from the ground, how do we use our sort of methodologies to, invest into these natural resources, take what we need, but not what we don't. We don't need a bunch of gold sitting in a vault. Uh, but, we of course do need some as we advance. And so really understanding that, implementing those sort of methodologies into the different industries, um, and also, sort of embracing innovation through different other sorts of structures. Um, I think that there's a huge opportunity to do a lot of good for a lot of people using these structures.
Wow, that's amazing. It's really good. It's, when you have the passion, the purpose for the people, and profit is it's just gonna come naturally, because you're putting the passion and the purpose and the people in front. Everything else will manifest in a beautiful way. You know what I mean? So that's amazing. That's
Thank you.
beautiful. So I heard you touch on barriers. So tell me some of the challenges and barriers that you face, and how were you, or at least working towards overcoming it, or how have you overcome them?
For sure. So back in sort of the NGO days, that when I was working there was a lot of barriers between capital, right? There's things like the distinctions-based approach, and you know, having to identify with a First Nation, you know, an Inuit community or a Métis sort of body or entity under the Indian Act, um, of course, is very negligent of the other 80% of our people that live off reserve, the people that are non-status. Um, and of course, it just further entrenches our people into that structure. And so that's created a lot of gaps within the communities. And so sort of that access to finance, that access to capital was a huge one, is a huge barrier for a lot of you know, our peoples. And I think that maybe it's you know, there's some areas to explore that I think we really seek to address. Um, and then, of course, challenges in terms of governance, right? There's a huge lack of just general transparency in the way that the Indian Act is set up, the way that the government has set up all these other NGOs and NPOs, and of course, that comes with a ton of you know, lack of accountability to the actual members, to the actual people that are affected on, you know, the day to day. And so, you know, we see a ton of money going into these organizations, you know, billions of dollars, but every statistic is getting worse. Every one of the statistics is getting worse. There's more violence, there's more overdoses, there's more poverty, there's, you know, the list goes on. The only one that's actually gotten any better is actually education. And so, you know, I'm hopeful about that. But as for us as sort of or myself as an entrepreneur or you know, within my ventures, I say a big part of it is really translating um, the kind of new way of doing things, or maybe integrating Indigenous people's ways of doing things, right, into business practices. A big issue that I see is there's a lot of talk within Indigenous peoples about sort of inclusivity. And so I think where, you know, there's a lot of really great intention there. There's also another side that Indigenous peoples are so politicized, and our political status is so important that we remain sovereign, that we, you know, remain distinct as a peoples, and not just as pan-Indigenous, but as the specific nations, myself as a Coast Salish, s'ဃlalam Chewhaytsum person, or, you know, another person as a Niska person, or Teltan, you know, Dene Casca person, right? And so really understanding that as we sort of move into the future, that these are things that we really need to think about, and that we cannot be kind of swallowed up by the system and further assimilated. And so definitely an area that, you know, as we move forward, there's a ton of education. It's definitely a huge barrier when we're having these conversations because, of course, we're so governance focused within our venture and just within our work.
Totally understand. That actually gave me goosebumps because, you know, even coming from the African side, we also do with tribes,
Mm.
chiefs, or yeah, we have chiefs in Africa. I'm Caribbean, but I go further back. Um, but there's chiefs there and stuff. And one thing I notice is with all these billions and millions of dollars from either IMF or other places where they get funding from, it comes with some conditions, you know.
Mhm.
And so now we have to find out in our own communities and our own tribes in our own areas, who's going to hold strong to the ancient ways, the traditional ways, the ways that keep us who we are, keep tradition, keep the respect, the love of the culture, the love of the people. You know, if you feel what I'm saying here, because yes, you'll get the funding, you'll get the money and all that, but it'll come with certain conditions. Who's going to
Yeah,
fall victim to those conditions, those selling out,
yeah,
those saying, okay, we'll give you this money, but you can't be too radical. You know, they'll
yeah,
start using,
yeah. I've gotten that email a million times.
yeah,
Don't say that. Stop saying
yeah.
this.
So, so you see, just those are some of the stipulations. But, I think as a new generation is getting more like, no, we hold true to ourselves and we're not going to take it. I see that, I see that for the younger generation. So I'm hopeful. And like you said, with the education, at least that's getting the proper channel of funding. So hopefully there'll be an epiphany with that as well. So. Yeah,
Mhm.
I hear you on that loud and clear. So
And
tell
I
me
think
some of the, yeah, you go ahead.
I was just going to touch on that point. I think, we look at these systems today, and especially as it relates to funding, and as, it's all because of this sort of false hierarchy. And I think as we kind of move forward, and we're in this very pivotal moment right now, both locally and sort of globally, and the shifts of kind of authority, we'll see things kind of uh, move differently, right? Because
Mhm.
it is a big part of where does the money come from. That's ultimately what we have to adhere to. Even within the political space, of course, we heard 1,000 times, don't do this thing, say that thing, you can't talk to these people, blah, 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 blah. Everybody's worrying about stepping on someone else's toes all the time. It stops anything from getting done. And ultimately, everybody's fighting over the funding dollars rather than actually doing the work, right? But I'm quite optimistic with how things are changing. And that's really what we're putting our bet on, is that there'll be a lot more of that kind of decentralized model, people being able to support each other as a community, and ultimately playing into that sort of self-governance that we won't have to look to that person sitting there with the billions of dollars of funding. Instead, we can just leverage within our community to make those changes how we see fit, right?
Perfect. Perfectly put. Thank you for that. So what are some of the key priorities that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I'd say sort of our main ones. I'll start off with data sovereignty. Data sovereignty is a huge conversation right now within Indigenous communities. I've yet to sort of sit down at a table and put that word out there and not spark a pretty big conversation. So it's somewhere in the ballpark of like 80% of Indigenous organizations or First Nations or communities are having these discussions right now. Of course, there hasn't been a very sort of viable solution to that problem, at least out in the open. And so that's really one of our kind of main points right now. The technology that we develop is inherently sovereign. Of course, I'm not a technology background, and it's kind of more on that governance side. But really was attracted to that because, of course, blockchain, whatever anybody thinks about it, I mean, it has its reputation, as any new technologies do, and rightfully should. It is inherently sovereign. Every individual owns their data. They can choose to do with their data as they see fit, and nobody can corrupt that. Nobody can take that and steal it, or it's definitely a big area that we're looking to address, and one of our sort of leading kind of issues that we're tackling. So next really being finance, right? The access to capital is a huge one. Only 0.02% of VC dollars in Canada are deployed to Canadian Indigenous entrepreneurs, while being 5+% of the population and growing. And I can say, even in my time here, I mean, raising capital in Canada is difficult, as it is. But of course, as an Indigenous venture, that's, again, really trying to be rooted in those systems, causes a lot of barriers. And I think that pretty much any Indigenous entrepreneur can agree with that, because we are so focused on our communities when we work. And I think a few of the arguments that I've heard, at least when we speak, is like, really, I guess maybe the first one I'll hit is there's over centralization of funding within the Indigenous venture space. And so it's kind of that checkbox approach where, oh, we have an Indigenous fund, or, oh, we have an Indigenous entrepreneur. Done. All right. when in reality, you know, accessing that capital, I mean, you got to reach out to 1,000 people before you raise, you know, a dollar, right? Like you're sending out LinkedIn messages, you're sending out emails, you're going to networking events. And yeah, if you're always being directed over here, the same thing, or oh nope, we've already done it, blah blah blah, it can be challenging. And so, you know, through our sort of platform and our technology and just general decentralized finance, it really does allow people to have that access to capital on a global scale, and that access to liquidity at a global scale, and just general visibility, right? In a way where they can, you know, sort of capitalize, and I think that's really exciting. And then I would say, you know, self-governance, of course, and just general transparency and accountability within organizations, and resource management, right? You know, over 60 or 70% of Indigenous peoples report corruption within their organizations, their local organizations. And sort of the other statistic that kind of makes that make sense is 75% of these organizations report finding it difficult for resource management, for accountability, and for these things. So, you know, we see on both sides there's that sort of want, but of course there's, you know, that strategically placed Indian Act right in the middle of it that doesn't actually allow our people that transparency or that accountability. And so again, the technology that we build and that we're betting on inherently is transparent. You can't, you know, on an Explorer, you can see every transaction, when it happened, how much it happened. You know, of course, you can choose on whether or not they're able to see who it is and whatnot. But of course, when a community holds their leadership accountable, I can see a big shift there in these things. So that all being said, you know, in Canada, there's a $500 billion something infrastructure gap for Indigenous peoples. There's, you know, $30 billion of lost opportunities through, you know, funding every year. Our GDP is less than half of what it should be, but we're sitting on like what, $1.3 trillion of resources that we could leverage and ways that we can leverage it without actually having to extract it. And so, you know, I think we're in a pretty good place to really address those specific challenges, and that's, you know, we want to kind of be there to develop the infrastructure so other folks can sort of stand on our shoulders and continue developing from there.
That's right. I love that decentralized model and making a global community, and that's the focus I think going forward. And yeah, I'm all for blockchain. Definitely, you know, those are all promising forms of technology that's coming in that will give you that, you know, openness. You know, what are they calling it, like this open way of banking or open way
Mhm.
of, you know, utilizing um, a communal type of
Yeah,
funding, a communal in that sense. So very good, very good. So
thank you.
so tell me your thoughts on like how do you feel about social impact in Canada?
The social impact in Canada, I mean, I think honestly from our standpoint, where we kind of stand on social impact is really like, what are we doing right now that's going to have a really long-term effect for our people's rights, right? And I think that's where we sort of, that's where we kind of hold ourselves to. I mean, that's certainly my position within the company, is just making sure that we're not doing anything that's going to kind of screw us over 30, 40, 50 years from now, if this technology is still, you know, advancing, which I really hope it does. But as for other, I mean, as for other sort of social impact entities, I mean, I do see a lot of that checkbox sort of thing still, at least within the Indigenous community. But I'm also, you know, I'm seeing a lot more sort of popping up, and a lot more of sort of the philosophies changing with the approach to it. So I'm hopeful that, you know, over the next, you know, especially with sort of younger people that have, you know, that are now taking leadership positions and have kind of seen the mistakes of the past, are able to maybe reassess the metrics that we actually track and kind of reassess the strategy that we've been taking. And I really hope that ultimately it can be sort of led by community. Um, Maybe one of the interesting things that we're building right now with a company, mining company, um, is really to track the impact of a mine within the environment, within the local economy, and just generally within the culture. And so we've built essentially like a subnetwork for the mine and then different decentralized autonomous organizations for the 6 different claims. 2 of these claims are protected. And so basically they're saying, all right, we'll hold this land, we'll ensure that, we don't extract from it, we don't explore it. It's here for your folks to continue to kind of be responsible for and own. But within the extraction sites, essentially what we've done is, we're launching tokenized versions of all the natural assets. There's over, I believe, 16,000 of them. And that includes the actual ore body. So the gold and the copper, that includes all their sort of financial assets as well. And so the really interesting part about this is we've built like a real-time auditing system that can manage all on-chain data and all off-chain data or assets. So as they extract the gold and the copper, you can actually see how that's impacting the environment based on the tokenized like natural assets within the water, within the soil, within the actual ore, within the air, right? Any one of those 16,000 sort of microorganisms. And so I'm also very hopeful to see how this technology can assess sort of auditing of impact within different different organizations or different parts of ecosystems and whatnot.
Exactly. Awesome. And so I guess that ties into your like the ultimate goal and what success looks like to you in a nutshell. What would you say?
For us, we're really focused on how to sort of create, economic sovereignty for Indigenous peoples while upholding, ensuring that they remain responsible for their environment, they remain, owners of their land and protectors of their land, and they're able to, uphold their sort of general governance structures and whatnot. And so I see, I see a really big opportunity to sort of monetize that exactly, right, as we're moving forward and as we have all these different jurisdictions. In Canada it's hard to invest, it's hard to innovate. I think our people, this provides a really interesting opportunity for our people to be those sort of first movers, creates specific jurisdictions for innovation, so that they can have one, put a actual sort of value maybe on their land, because of course under the Indian Act you can't, and create a real revenue source for our people without having to extract, without having to uh, you know harm our environments or bring in outsiders to that that of course put us in bad positions.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow, this has been like so impactful, and it definitely really lets us see where we are at the current moment and where we can get to, and how we can collaborate with natives. And really, there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of reconciliation still that needs to be dealt with, and also the internal, like you said, the governance part of it, because we will see the change, but it has to start internally first. And that's on so many levels. That's
Absolutely.
within your tribes and within our own bodies and our own minds.
Yeah.
We have to see that we're only here for a short time. So I
Yeah.
always say we're just planting seeds.
Yeah.
It's going to be passed on to the next generation. So whatever we acquire, whatever we accumulate over these short 80 to 100 years, it's going to be gone. We're not taking it
Mhm.
with us. So it's
Yeah.
really about the next generation and moving forward and setting that precedence to know that it's now time to get back to, the original source of things and how things work. And then on top of that, bringing in the new innovation, bringing in the things and creating that gap and, putting our words into action. There's a
Yeah.
lot of, this stuff going on, but we really need that action. Yeah. So that we can make our future selves very proud. So this has
Absolutely.
been very remarkable. I appreciate you. So my last question is, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to actions at this time?
I would say, for any sort of group looking to work with Indigenous peoples, there seems to be a pretty sort of cookie cutter approach that I've seen in my time sort of consulting. I think that really understanding the protocol going in and understanding that, while we acknowledge lands and we acknowledge territories, there's also protocols that go along with that. And so, as we, we really need to understand that we have host nations, that they have host protocols and laws and rights and integrating those, not the band council, not the Indian Act, nothing that I, that the Indian Services Canada or Northern Affairs Canada or whatever is created, what the actual people in the big house or wherever they create their laws, understanding those, approaching them, following their protocol and doing business on their protocol. Because ultimately, something that's really interesting is, and is proven is, Aboriginal title exists. That's the underlying title to the land. And so, then Crown, then federal, then you have all the other, governing bodies that really working, adhering to those, to that host nation's methodologies is super important, and taking the time to sort of understand that and utilize that in a day-to-day and look at that as authority as one would any sort of regulatory body or something is I think can go a long way.
Perfectly put. Perfectly put. Wow. So, I really, really appreciate your time today. On behalf of SETSI, we appreciate you, Ethan, so much. We wish you nothing but success. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep, really setting the precedents for the future generations. So we'll definitely be collaborating soon. I'll definitely get Victor to send an invite. We have different things I know that are coming up. We have our Solidarity Working Group, which I know that you would love. I don't know if you've ever attended, but we definitely extend the invite to you. But that's what it's all about: collaboration and putting words into action. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Thank
Oh,
you for
you're
having
welcome. You're welcome. So we will end the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So once again, Ethan, this is not our last meeting. We'll definitely be collaborating. And on behalf of SETSI, we thank you again.
That's good. Thank you.
All right. All the best.
Have a good one.
You
Cheers.
too. Bye-bye.